Today, beautiful teachers, we're joined by Amy Chaplin, who wears many hats, much like me. Most of you should know her from her fabulous Piano Pantry podcast. If you're not already subscribed to that, go follow or subscribe after you listen to this episode. Amy is a piano teacher, speaker, blogger and podcaster. She loves supporting teachers on all things related to teaching, organisation, productivity and life on the Piano Pantry blog and podcast through her digital organisation coaching series and retreat. Her independent piano studio is located in Bluffton, Indiana. One surprising fact about Amy, if you haven't listened to her show, you won't know that she used to sell Cutco knives. She sold these for 3 years while she lived in Australia, I believe, and she has said these facts on her podcast before, but still a surprising fact if you didn't know it about her already. Let's welcome Amy to the show. So, welcome Amy. For those people out there who somehow don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about your studio and about Piano Pantry?
Yes, first of all, I'm so excited to be on your podcast with you, Nicola, and congratulations on 300 episodes. That's a huge milestone. So I'm Amy Chaplin, and I have a piano studio in Northeast Indiana. I have taught anywhere from 20 to 45 students over the years. I've been teaching piano for, well, more than 20 years now, although full-time about 14, something like that. I started a blog for piano teachers in 2016 out of just the desire to get ideas out of my head and the need to share with teachers things that I was learning. So I started the Piano Pantry blog in 2016. And then I started the Piano Pantry podcast in, I believe it was January of 2022. So that's about 116 episodes in right now. In general, I love supporting teachers on just like business management, running a studio, a lot about organization. I've started doing a lot more on digital organization in the last few years through a retreat that I do actually in my home for teachers in the summertime, which has been a lot of fun, new venture. Also through an online version of the same content as well with a digital organization kind of coaching series. I do a little bit of consulting on the side and also started doing a workshop with my friend Joy Morin on how to organize your life with Notion. And we actually did that workshop back in March and are planning on doing it again this fall because it was such a success.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I think people need more organization in their lives. I hear that a lot from teachers, so I think it's fantastic you're doing that. So you gave a much needed, in my opinion, presentation at MTNA in Atlanta about presenting, about submitting your proposal and presenting at conferences like MTNA or other places you might present. What inspired you to put that proposal for the proposal session together?
Well, really lack of topic. Like there was no one out there doing it. And I don't know, it just came into my mind one day, like as I was brainstorming, just thinking about like, what is something unique that I don't see happening that I feel like is a need? And that was it. You know, when you want to submit proposals and start presenting, I think it's really important that you present on topics that come naturally to you and that you feel like you have a lot to say about, right? That was one of them. I was like, I've got so like many opinions on what a good presentation looks like that I, wanted to tell people what they should do. No, just being silly. But well, and also just my own struggles. Like when I first started submitting proposals, I honestly didn't know, am I supposed to submit like the proposal first or am I supposed to write the session so that I know what my content is and then write the proposal from there? So I asked a colleague and the answer is you write the proposal first for the most part. I mean, if you feel like you need to kind of get some content out there, you could hash it together a little bit, but you don't want to put work into putting a presentation together when you don't get accepted. So yeah, I just wanted to share with teachers my own struggles and what I learned. And yeah, it was great fun.
Yeah. No, I love that you put it together. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go to it because we were scheduled at the same time.
I know.
Which was so annoying. But you filled me on some of the cliff notes later at dinner, which was great. But I remember when I was first submitting these things, especially being outside of the whole system, or that's what I feel like I am anyway, because I don't have a state MTA, like I don't have the various levels that you might kind of pick some of these things up from. I remember just putting things together and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just going to send this off and see what happens. This is what I think a proposal might mean, and just submitting it, because how would you know? So it's great to talk about things that nobody talks about, that nobody, you know, that can be opaque to people who are outside that world. People who maybe would be afraid to submit wouldn't do what I did, which is, well, I'm just going to look like an idiot if I look like an idiot, and I'll just submit it. I'll deal with it. But if you're a bit more worried about looking a certain way or not doing things right, I think you might be put off from submitting.
Yeah, you just got to do it, right? And just take it as it is.
Yeah. And it's interesting you brought up the proposal or presentation first, because I just assumed you would just write the proposal and then if they accepted it, you would come up with the presentation. Like, that was what was logical to me. I didn't think about doing it any other way. But I remember having a conversation with someone else who was presenting at the first NCKB I was presenting at, and at some stage implying that it was the first time I was giving this session. And they were like, oh, so you just submitted the proposal? Like, they were really surprised that I had done it that way around. I was like, oh, is this not the done thing? So
yeah, and it's good to, like, for me to know, like, I wasn't the only one. Like, at first I was like, oh my gosh, how silly am I to not know this, you know? But once I started talking about it, I realized there were other people that genuinely had the same question.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think the big question is just, do I have enough content, like, to talk about this? I think the answer that you can know is if you feel like you're very passionate about it and it's something like you just have to, if you know you have a lot to say, then you're going to be fine, right? If it's a topic that you're kind of reaching for, like, well, maybe this is something they might be interested in, then you might struggle at that point. So
yeah. And I think it comes with experience as well. I think in the beginning, if you're submitting, like, it was your first one and you're going to submit 7 key ways to blank, 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 you better already have your 7. But
right, yes.
if you're a bit further ahead, you might just pick a number and be like, I'm going to come up with, you know, I'm sure I can come up with 13. 13 sounds fine.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe you're not, like, at that stage, that loose with it, Amy. But sometimes, you know, if one number sounds better than another because of alliteration, I'm going to pick that number. So.
Right. True. Yeah, that's interesting.
You're like, true,
I would probably
but
make sure
wrong.
I had my points, like, written out if I was going to do that.
Yeah. But let's take it back. Do you remember the first conference you ever presented at? What was that?
I do. It was just one of those moments in your lifetime kind of a thing where it was a big deal, you know? In my mind, I think about the first national conference because to me, that's a big conference. I mean, my very first conference was my state conference in 2014. Maybe 80 people attend. So it's much smaller scale and they're people that I know. So it's a little more cozy. But the 2016 MTNA National Conference in San Antonio was my very first time. And it was exhilarating. Like, just the thrill of, like, oh my gosh, like, I felt like I'm with the big dogs, you know? But it's just so new, and you just think about, I mean, before I ever started presenting, I remember thinking I could never do that. Like, wow, look at those people. I don't have enough to say. And so there's a little bit of that anticipation of, like, can I, you know, speak to something and people enjoy it at this national level? Yeah. So it's exhilarating, terrifying, exciting, you know, all at the same time. And I can picture the room still. It was actually quite a large room and there were a lot of people. The topic was, it was called The Wild West of Marketing. How do you know it really works? And were you there?
No, I wasn't there. You then recorded it for Tim's site. That's how I remember it. I remember you mentioning that it was your first big conference as well.
Yeah. And that was another memory. Tim was a part of that because I had just started following his, like, Tim Topham TV, like, pop series or whatever before he had his membership site. And I was like, Tim Topham is here. I was like a groupie, you know? And he was in my session. Yeah, so it's a funny memory, but it helps if it's your very first time to have a friend there too. Like, having Karen Thixton, who is a previous MTNA president, is from my state, and she actually helped me rewrite my proposal and come up with a better title and everything. And she introduced me during the session. So that was really helpful to just have somebody there that I knew. And then, of course, then having friends sitting in the front row, you know, there to help you hand out handouts and all that kind of stuff. Makes it a little bit. It's good memories.
Yeah, that does help. And chatting to whoever's going to introduce you a little bit beforehand can help if you know who it's going to
Yeah.
be. Karen has actually happened to introduce me at both MTNAs I've been to as well. So she's lovely and
She's
fantastic to have on your side. You're not against anyone, but you know what I mean. To have in your team. Yeah.
What about you, Nicola? What about your first conference, can I ask?
Oh, yeah, sure. My first conference was actually the UK one, which is called the Music and Drama Expo. That was 2018, I think. Yes, it was 2018. So I went to my first conference, like big proper conference. I'd been to the Irish one, which doesn't exist anymore. If anyone's looking for it, it doesn't exist. But for a couple of years it existed. Anyway, I went to my first big one, which was NCKP in 2017. NCKP is National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy. It's outside Chicago. Kind of chatted to some people there or went to sessions and kind of realized, oh, like normal people present here. You don't have to
Normal
be...
people, I love that.
You know, you don't have to... No one's going to hand you a golden key. You know, it's open. Is kind of...
Yeah.
I thought there would be some kind of gatekeeper, or would be people only within the organization or something like that. Realized it was a bit more open, and that's when I started looking up different conferences and applied. Again, just guessing, like, okay, I guess they want proposal. Let's write something we think sounds like a proposal. Yeah, submitted at the same time.
You said that was 2016, sorry, right?
2017.
27. Okay, yeah. I think we met at that one.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
I remember sitting next to you during one of the big sessions, I think.
Yeah, probably. The bit I remember is we were walking together to dinner, or maybe it was Tim's Drinks meetup, but we were walking together, me, you, and Joy, and you asked me how long my blog had been going, which started in 2013, and Joy, obviously, you know, she's one of the longest term bloggers, right? Yeah. I just remember you going, oh, so I'm the baby. Like, because your blog was like a year old.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't remember that, but that sounds like something I would say.
The things that stand out, you know, we all remember different snippets of these things. But yeah, that was the first one I ever attended. And then I applied literally like directly after that. Like I wrote proposals for conferences on the train journey I was taking after that conference and sent them to the UK one because the deadline was like right away once I realized it existed, and to the next NCKP after that. I spoke at that as well. But yeah, that was my first one. It was a crazy for a first conference. The place where they used to host that conference, it's in a different venue now, but it's like one big hall, and they just put up room dividers that don't go all the way to the ceiling for the different sessions. It's music and drama, so there's like trombone teachers and, you know, drama playing on a stage, like Shakespeare being screamed out the other side of the room. Like it is so loud, or it was so loud when they were in there. You presented and you wore a headset mic, and everyone in your audience had to wear headphones connected to your headset mic so that they could hear what you were saying.
Seriously, that's so crazy. I've never heard anything like that before.
It was bizarre.
I guess at least they were conscious of it, and like sometimes at conferences, I was in a session this last time at MTNA, and there's a piano in one room, and all there is their divider, and you can't hear. Actually, it was your session.
Yeah,
Nicola,
the app one, was it? Or
the session. You can't hear. Yeah. It's like they need to flip-flop and put the piano at the other side of the room or something.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. The stages should be at opposite ends. But yeah. The people setting up the rooms aren't always anything to do with music, so they don't realize what it's going to be like.
True. You mentioned something that I actually think is a great point. You said that you wrote your proposals after you were at the conference, like on the train. And I think that for me, that's always a huge time. Like my brain is going. Like that is when I'm like writing down ideas for sessions. I don't know that I usually write proposals right away, but I'm definitely brainstorming a lot right away. So
yeah, it's a great time to come up with ideas, because when you've just seen all these different ideas thrown at you, it can generate your own. I agree. Several people at the last conference at MTNA were saying, oh, now we have to go home and write our proposals right away, because the MTNA submission is always like a few weeks after the last MTNA. But I actually like that it's close, because you just go home, get it done, and that's like your MTNA time of the year to do it.
And it's on your mind. It's kind of fresh. Yeah, I agree.
So what do you think makes a proposal get accepted? I think people would make a lot of assumptions. Even in the chat we were having at a dinner, you can tell that people who haven't applied to these kind of things or whatever are expecting that maybe you or I or anyone else that they've heard of before, who have spoken at conferences before, just naturally get accepted. And that's not the case. I'm sure you've had proposals turned down. Yeah.
Definitely. I wish I would have kept track of how many, because I know how many sessions I presented, but I don't know how many rejections I have, and there's been tons. So, yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's just a part of it, and I don't think it's personal. What do you think makes something get accepted or declined?
Well, I've never been on a conference committee, but my opinion is, first of all, you got to start with a great title. I feel like that's the first thing that people are going to read. And you want it to be very clear and concise. I think it's very natural. Like I always thought, oh, I need to be very clever with it. Oh, it's fun and it's good if you can be clever. Like my session on this was the wow factor, crafting winning proposals and engaging presentations. So that was a little clever and cute, but I don't think that that's necessarily the main thing. Like, does your title grab you? Does it seem interesting? Does it seem like something that actually speaks to what your content is about as well, right? Does it fit what you're going to talk about? For me, if I were looking at proposals, I would be looking for something that was interesting, something that was unique, something that I've never seen presented before. So I would start with that. You can also pay attention. Like if you're someone that's in a lot of Facebook groups and things that are going on, I would pay attention to topics that are relevant to teachers that maybe they're going through in the moment. The biggest thing, which is I think the easiest thing, in my opinion, is just submitting more than one proposal. So not just submitting one, just crossing your fingers, hoping it gets accepted. And then if it doesn't, going, oh, well, better look next time. Or, well, this wasn't a good proposal. Like just because something isn't accepted doesn't mean that it wasn't a good proposal. It just means that that's not what that particular committee was looking for. Right? Because every committee is different. So increasing your odds and submitting more than one. Definitely. I'm sorry to all the conference committees out there that are now going to start getting more proposals that they have to go through because of my advice. No.
No, but it's true. And I think that's another thing that does surprise people, because I've had many conversations where people ask me, or it comes up somehow, how many proposals I've submitted. They're like, what? Whoa, kind of thing. Like I usually get a reaction for it. I'm like, well, if I was running a conference, honestly, I'd want choice. Like, I don't know what they're going to get. So if I just submit one that's like improvisation using scales, well, if they have another proposal and they like that one slightly better, they're going to pick that, and they're obviously not going to have mine as well, depending on the size of the conference and all of that. Like, they're not going to want too many duplicates. So I've always submitted more than one. And again, I didn't know I was weird. Like the idea of, oh, you should have created your presentation first. I didn't know that was even an idea that anybody would have. So I just did it my own way.
Do you tend to submit on varying topics? Because I know that's one thing that Peter Mack suggested, which I think is great, and I tend to already do, I feel like. But do you tend to okay, something business, something teaching, so that there's variety? And that, I think that's another huge thing too.
Yeah, the example, I mean, Peter Mack in your episode gave an example of don't submit pedaling in 1950s repertoire and then pedaling in 1940s make it different topics. And I've always naturally done that. That's just always again being kind of instinctive to me, that I'd try one for business and one that's more of an improv thing and maybe one tech thing, so that they have a bit of choice. And I always feel a little bit like I'm bugging the selection committee because I'm submitting so many, but at the same time I want them to have choice. And Karen Bixton, who we mentioned, did come up to me at last year's MTNA and say, oh, thank you for all the wonderful proposals, or something like that. Like, it was so hard to choose. And I was like, so I thought she was being really nice, but maybe implying that I shouldn't have submitted so many. But so I kind of probed her on that, and she was like, no, it was great. Okay. So it's fine.
How many did you submit, Nicola? Are you willing to admit that?
Oh, I can admit that. I can't remember though. I'd guess 5 or 6. That's pretty unusual for me. Yeah.
Is it? Okay. So I can up my game. I usually submit about 3. I was thinking about submitting 4 this year, and I actually admitted that on Andrea Miller's podcast. And then I asked her to edit it out because I'm like, I don't know if I want people to know that I'm submitting so many. I'm like, oh, Nicola can't admit it. Okay.
Yeah. The only thing I don't want people to think when I say that is that I'm expecting them to accept a whole bunch of them. I'm not saying I should take over your conference. I'm saying pick one of these.
No, it's pick a session and what is interesting to you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But
there was one more thing I was thinking about as far as what increases your chances. Again, this is just conjecture because I don't really know. But I feel like most people desire to have a full session. It's kind of like what people want. They've got a lot to say. When conferences started offering 20-minute sessions, I remember hearing people like complain like, oh, I submitted a 60-minute session and they want me to do it in 20. Oh, that's so hard, you know. But my opinion is if you just say that I'm willing to do a 20-minute, that to me, I would think that would increase your chances because my assumption is that maybe they don't receive as many proposals in the 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would be interested to know the numbers on that.
I would be interested too. I would also be interested. I feel like the last one, they accepted my one that was 20 minutes because I was looking through my notes as I was figuring out what to submit for next year. I was looking through what I'd submitted last year. That was the only one I'd selected 20 minutes because I kept a note of what I was writing. That's the one they accepted. So I kind of wonder whether that like, yes, it increases your chances of getting accepted, or if you have multiple, they're like, well, that one's 20 minutes, that's easier to fit in, and that's the one that gets in. Maybe it was just the topic. I have no way to say. Like, I've no counter argument to that. I've no other data. So,
well, according to Peter, again, he says that it's not like if you say, I would like to do a 20-minute session, that doesn't mean that they're going to accept it as a 20, that they might accept it and say, hey, we'd like you to do this as an hour session. Yeah. So it's not like a cut and dry. Like they don't necessarily look at the pool of 20-minute sessions and look at the pool of 60-minute sessions and decide separately. They consider them all together, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense because I'd say they do get far fewer 20 minutes and yet a lot of the conference is 20-minute sessions now. Like that's a really large part of the conference. So they obviously need to pick from the 60 minutes as well. Like they need to mix it up. Another interesting thing from someone who has been on these kinds of committees, because the last year when we were submitting for this year, we submitted a group session. Marie Lee had approached me and another couple of teachers to do this app session that you were at that we were mentioning about the noise. But when she put together the proposal and ran it by us and stuff, and she kept it way shorter than I normally do. She said, I always like it to the point. So I just want to mention that I don't normally go close to their maximum word total at all. But she was way under what I would normally do as well. So it was interesting to see that from someone who's actually, you know, being involved in this because they do have to read so many proposals.
That is interesting. I'm with you. I'm never at 250. I usually hit like in maybe the 200 to 220 range-ish, I would say. But I would just assume that they want more description, you know, like, so basically you can get accepted and not necessarily write a long abstract.
I mean, you need to write more if you need to write more, but I would say don't put in any filler is what I've kind of gathered through my years of doing these.
Great. That's really great advice. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's very straightforward, which this session was. Like, we're going to show you a bunch of apps. You're going to play with the apps. The end.
Right,
like, that's what's going to happen.
How much is there to say about that?
Yeah. So why would we go on and on about the value of iPads or something if we don't need to? So I think that was wonderful. And I think especially useful for people who were like, which I think a lot of music teachers were, who were really into school. And you often got assignments that were a certain number of words. And you always tried to go over that to prove that you had put in the effort, right? So we can see a word count and go, oh, I have to meet it or I have to come close to it. I can't be too far under that.
Right. Oh, interesting.
So once they are accepted then, Amy, let's fast forward and we'll look at the positive side. So yeah, you might get some rejections out of your 5 or 6 if you're doing a me and submitting a whole bunch of them. You'll get all those rejection emails and then maybe you get one that's accepted and that's awesome. What should people do, not next, when it gets closer to the time, a little bit closer to the time? How should you prepare if it's, say, your first presentation or you haven't done that many of them?
Well, I think everybody's different. I am someone that tries to prepare a little more ahead of time, as I'm sure you probably are as well. For me, as soon as I submit the proposal, I designate a document, which is just like a page in Notion. And it's just the page that I had the proposal on, essentially, where I start brainstorming. Because once I am thinking about a topic, I start thinking about the session itself. I mean, randomly. I mean, it's not like I'm sitting down like intentionally thinking about it. I'm making dinner and I think, oh, that's something I should say, or that's a resource I should, point out. And I write stuff down throughout the entire year, especially if it's a new session. And the interesting thing is like this wow factor session that I did I basically had the session, the content all ready to go when it was time to actually put together the session. I mean, I of course had to put it together, but I had so much stuff that I had already brainstormed tips that I didn't have to do that work ahead of time. That's a big tip that I have for anyone, is just designate a location to write your ideas down. Don't wait until it's time to put the session together to think through it. So I like to get an outline. Sometimes I script out quite a bit of it just so I can kind of time it and see where it's at. Not everybody does that. Some people are just going to get themselves bullet points and then talk through it. It just depends. I like to then plug in supporting materials, after that, great quotes, resources that are useful. And then the last thing is to put together the handout. But yeah, I like having mine done at least a few weeks ahead of time personally. It's not always been the case. There's been plenty of times where I'm doing it a week or two before. But this year, I think I had mine done in February because I did it for my Patreon crew, which was a good kind of way to get it out there. And it felt so good to just know it was done and I didn't have to stress about going into it. But yeah, everybody's different. Again, I'm going to bring Mac up one more time. He was sharing with me, so funny, how he has a friend, Ingrid Clarefield, that they present together a lot and they're fabulous together. But she's more like me. She likes to present ahead of time or put it together ahead of time. And he's like, we have 2 days. That's plenty of time. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which sounds incredibly stressful.
Some people that thrive in that is not me.
Yeah, when people mentioned that they were finalizing their PowerPoint on the plane on the way to the conference, I'm like, okay, good for you. I don't think I want to ever co-present with you because I just don't think it would work together. Yeah,
it would stress me out big time.
Yeah, I'm the same as you in that I start with a loose list of ideas and brainstorm and then try and group it together, then make the slides from that. I probably differ to you in that I usually don't write a full script. But for those who don't like writing a full script but do want to prepare in some way or have something written down and work on their timing, a good thing to do is talk through it if that feels more natural to you, but record it. And if possible, if you can get software to do this, have it transcribed. I mean, there's loads of software out there to do that. So I've done that sometimes. It depends on the presentation, but sometimes I'll talk it through as a first, oh, this is roughly what I want to say. Let's just give it a go. Right. And then have that transcribed, and then you can catch those natural phrases that come out that you may not have written in writing, typing in, kind of embed that. But I think the thing we have in common is definitely preparing in advance. But either way, even if you are someone who doesn't want to do it ages in advance, you want to do it much closer to the time, you have to prepare and you have to practice, and you have to practice in front of a person, or at the very least recording it on video, on your phone, just for yourself. Because if you don't put yourself under that pressure, you'll never find out how long you're actually going to take to go through the material. You could be too short and be under time, not the end of the world. You don't want it to be too far under time. We've all seen the presentations that run over. Yeah, that is a camp you don't want to be in.
I'm with you on that, definitely. And the more I do it, the less I script. It gets easier. I just remember in the early days, that was so helpful to me to just write it out. And it just forces you to really think through, what you want to say. And like you said, finding those key phrases, just getting those thoughts out and making sure I'm thorough. I like to be thorough, and that I've thought through everything. Yeah, I'm with you. Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds silly to say to musicians because obviously they understand that you have to practice for another kind of performance. But then sometimes for this kind of performance, and it is a performance, presenting is, you're getting up on a stage, whether there's an actual stage or not, and presenting your ideas. That's a kind of performance as well. And you have to prepare for it as if it is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. Any parting words of wisdom about presenting?
I would just say, one thing we didn't really talk much about was your slides that go along with it. Make sure that the slides are not there to be your presentation. They are to support what you're communicating to the audience, right? So slides are not for putting your entire text, and do not type out, everything in full script on your slides. I like to think 1 point per slide. And in my mind, I try to think less than 6 words per slide as well. So just use the visuals to support what it is that you're saying.
Yeah, Absolutely. I like to think about the slide. I often have just images, but yeah, maybe a few words. It depends on the circumstance. But I think about it as just a punctuation to the thing you're saying. That's all it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to tell you what to say. It's not supposed to give your audience all the information. You're doing that. Otherwise, they could just read your slides. So
it's not your cue card, right?
yeah, exactly. And if you need cue cards, fine, use them, but they should be in your hand. Thank you so much again, Amy, for coming on the show. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.